Welcome, everyone. This is the October 7th Jail Zones production user call. We have Michael, Mario, Jamie, Antonik, Dave, and myself. So let's get started.
And
Oh, and Daniel.
and Phil showed up late.
So, Antonik, you mentioned you had some routing questions for the call. You're muted.
Oh, sorry, did you ask me something?
I asked Antonik, he's mentioned that he wanted to talk about jail routing questions, but he's muted, so maybe we skip over it. Jamie, what did you decide for the jail descriptor?
Oops, I was muted. I went with a minimal solution. Gibbs' complaints were mostly about overkill. He never specifically mentioned that, but in mostly that when I was doing more wasn't being done. And it's true that when you do the things that automatically add KQ stuff to new jails, there are still corner cases where it can't be handled. And if there's corner cases where the caller has to handle it anyway, it makes sense to just have the caller handle it. We
Yes.
cannot get to the point where we can do automatic KQ that catches everything without gaps. It's just not the way KQ is set up. So right now I just have it when there's a new jail created, it tells you, here's a new jail with this JID, and then you're responsible for getting its descriptor and adding it to KQ as you want. It makes it much easier to handle that way.
Yeah. Makes sense. So did all of that make it into 15.0?
Yes. Yes, it is in I think like Alpha 3 or something. Definitely in by now.
Okay. Mm, Thank you for that. So I'll have to write the jail watching utility.
Yeah.
So
And
kind
I'd
of,
even like Jail 8 to start using those, but that'll be a 16 project.
yeah. It could make the code a bit cleaner when it comes to having to toggle persistent, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't need persistent if you've got the descriptor around.
So the descriptor would keep the jail alive while you go through the created hook, right? So that you don't.
Actually, no. I take that back.
The
Because the
creator
descriptor
doesn't.
can you can watch a descriptor to see when a jail dies. So the descriptor does not keep the jail alive. We still need persistent.
Okay, so it doesn't help there.
It doesn't help that. No. It helps just the usual make sure you're talking to the same jail thing. You know, the reason the descriptors are good.
Hmm. So Dave, uh, did you make any progress regarding the OCI jail runtime specification?
You mean getting it updated in the spec upstream?
Yeah, and having a reference implementation.
No, this will be a slow process over a few months.
Okay. Luckily, nothing stops us from implementing drafts.
Exactly.
Jamie, I know we talked about it before we started recording, but let's tie up the executable jail.conf. So for 16, let's so for FreeBSD 16, a -x flag will not be required, and don't rely on the file descriptor file system fdisk-fs.
Mm-hmm.
And
And still perhaps looking at the what's passed on command line and environment. Don't need to go to the level of detail the discussion we had, but it still merits some looking at.
yeah, and it needs to be documented.
Yes, that's true. The man page should have it.
Do we have anything else?
I could make a note about some quick tweaks to my Netgraph tool, NG Buddy, that could impact some jail work a few people are doing.
Okay.
I removed.
What?
You want me to talk about that now, or you
Yeah,
want to go
sure.
over something? Okay. It has to do with the way NetIF, the RC NetIF works, and how it ingests the /etc network.subroutine file, SUBR. How other hypervisor managers handle this, like, but basically NetIF creates the clones. That step creates the clones, and then also creates the configures the interfaces.
Yes, it does that unless you run just clone up, right?
Sorry.
So if you run service netf start, it will create the clones and then configure them, right?
Yeah. So it all happens in that step. So for virtual machines, they create virtual.
Sorry, you
You know,
just
my thought was that
your audio is failing on my end.
no, but that was a horrible mistake, because the way the way my script works, that means that you can't bind to a VLAN or another. You can't bind a network, a NetGraph bridge to a VLAN, because that won't exist by the time NGBuddy runs. So I just pushed it after NetIF, and then I just ingested the /etc/network.subroutine, and I just configured to have solved that problem. So now NGBuddy is friendly to other types of cloned interfaces and shouldn't fight with them. So doing this, that's not 100% why I brought this up. That I brought this up because, like, could that just be, does NGBuddy, part of RC, and could we
Daniel,
describe? Yeah.
your audio is just cutting out for me. I'm sometimes losing you for a second.
Oh no. I'm gonna switch off my headphones.
But please try, because it's hard to follow you if there's half a sentence missing here and there.
Is it coming in better now?
I don't know yet. So
Okay.
far,
Well,
you haven't cut out again.
Okay, so what might have you missed? Okay, so NetIF, I was before NGBuddy was going before NGBuddy because I think that's what I forget. I think VirtualBox did. So I just sort of copied VirtualBox and I said, oh, okay, well, I'll create my virtual networks before NetIF starts so that you can use ifconfig underscore, the EIFace name to configure it. And it'll run in order with the basic FreeBSD tools. So anyway, I moved it after, and now I just add the step of running the or up or something like that to bring the interface. We can bind to switches with my tool, but I guess the question I had was why not have that in we could would it be reasonable to add netgraph support just to RC for basic things like making bridges and stuff like that. Maybe it's too hairy because there are too many netgraph options to do that. Um, but I don't know. I was just thinking about that. Is that something that could just go in um, RC rather than need a utility RC script like NGBuddy?
Possibly, but in my opinion, the NetIF script is already the worst case we have of RC.D scripting.
Mm, yeah,
It's at the nexus of so much stringly typed confusion that, yeah, you could add it. It wouldn't be too hard, I think, but
yeah. I guess there's other. And now that I'm talking through it, I realize because if you're creating a switch, you're creating a bridge on another clone. Like the order of operations has to be perfect. So maybe it can't be in there.
well, for hosts, but not for jails, you could rely on devd to run your RC.D script on demand.
Right.
So you get a devd event if something happens, and then you in response. Right now, the GC called ether startup script, which, yeah, it's named like that because when the feature was first added, the usual case for hot plugging network cards was PC cards with Wi-Fi or Ethernet.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
script eventually calls into NetIF, or
All right. Okay. So that
so you could install that into etc devd.
hmm. I think I'll try that. That's a pretty nice solution.
The problem is that devd is a singleton in the userland, so there can be only one devd system on the whole kernel, no matter how many VNet enabled jails you have. So it's a problem if you want it to work in a
Yeah, I've only
VNet
needed
enabled
to.
jail, which acts as a parent for some other jail. I know this is not the most common thing to do,
No,
but there is no good way to proxy that into that jail. And not all devctl messages are properly scoped. So sometimes you won't get the jail, you just get the event.
yeah, and I think you're cutting out. Didn't hear that last sentence.
Sorry.
Never mind.
So, the problem is that the devctl notifications you get as devd are not always correct, include the scope for the VNet. So sometimes you just get this interface was created, but you don't know in that which VNet.
I see.
At least it used to be like that. I don't know if this has been fixed so that you get the additional argument. But even then, there's no way to run a dev-d in a child jail. So, in my opinion, the rc.d script should work without dev-d, at least inside a jail.
Nice.
So if you have the NetF start function, right? And it turns on the Wi-Fi interface, it creates the Wi-Fi interfaces, creates the clones, handles renames, then calls the common function for starting an interface. Yeah. And then potentially reasons, okay, IP filter for legacy reasons for those still using the old IP filter firewall, and then it calls JLib, the bridge startup, and it calls the static routing script. And it does not apply proper routing. Oh, nice. Or do they want to split the interface name? Yeah, so much of the rc.d scripting breaks when you have field separators in your interface names, like if you have a space, tab, or newline in an interface name. Anyway.
All right, thanks, Jan. I'm gonna switch devices because my audio is still cutting out. So,
I don't know if it's yours or mine.
well, I'll give it a shot anyway. I'll be back.
Do we have any other topics? Hi, Philip.
None from me at the moment.
I don't have any pressing questions, just trying to keep up on all the things.
That's fine too. I guess then we will just have a fairly short meeting unless Daniel can make it back.
I do have, this is maybe more of an opinion sort of a thing. How do you all decide when to use, say, a VNet jail versus just a regular non-VNet jail? Because I've set up both, and I've been leaning toward more VNet jails because I can do PF in there and not have to worry about the host managing that. But I didn't know if you had any better logic about when you choose to do VNet versus non-VNet. Are there any guidelines?
Just if you find a need.
Yep.
It's easier to do non-VNet, but you bump into a wall, then you say, okay, I need to have the more complicated configuration just because the easy stuff is limited. So I think you're really on the right direction.
I would also say don't use it unless you have to, because there's overhead in it, both overhead when it comes to managing jails, but also when it comes to performance. So an
Okay.
alias jail will always be cheaper on the CPU than VNet jail with software bridging or routing. I tend to configure my services so that I don't have the need for a firewall inside the jail. As in, just don't bind anything you don't want to expose.
Okay, that makes sense.
It often works is if you want to have a proxy between two jails, just use a Unix socket to Unix socket proxy, something like S-pipe-D or S-tunnel, when you need an encrypted tunnel, so that you have a Unix socket in one jail listening and another one, a proxy which will then connect. So let's say you have your mail server, you have your postfix in one, you have your dovecot in another, and you want to deliver a mail to you via LMTP. I will just have S-pipe-D running in one jail as a server so that I have a Unix socket to deliver to, and on the other side, it will then connect to the proper service so that I kind of tunnel a Unix socket.
And the S-pipe D, I haven't used that particular command before, just in my setups. So does that just open a pipe just between the two jails?
It's a secure pipe, but it does not use pipes. It uses Unix stream sockets so that you have bidirectional connections.
Okay.
So where let's say you have some service you would normally bind to, and now you think, oh, I have to secure this service because this is plaintext HTTP or some other plaintext protocol, and you only want to make that available to one other jail. You can even now try to set up a firewall, or you could do other things. A simple solution would also be to create an ePair interface to connect the two jails if they're on the same host, and only bind the service to that IP address. Don't bind it to any IP address, bind it to that interface IP address. If the service supports it, link local addresses work great for this kind of thing, which has the advantage that they're implicitly scoped to the interface. If it has to be remote, not a problem, use a WireGuard interface.
Okay. Yeah, what I've done kind of in that is I've been figuring out the bridge networking with tying in VNet and ePair and all that to see how that would work for me. But I think you're right about the overhead, that just adds more overhead and more complexity.
Yeah, you have to disable large receive offloading and transmit TSO on the interface. If it is a bridge member, then yeah, any firewalling you have to do, it's just close your system down. For gigabit Ethernet, it's not a problem. Any modern system will easily saturate that if you have reasonably sized network packets. So if you have something like even, let's say you run Nextcloud as a file server, it works fine over gigabit Ethernet. But once you get to 10 gig, you will just burn a whole CPU core on it. And if your packet sizes aren't that large or your CPU is not the fastest, you're not going to saturate a 10 gig link with ePair and bridge. And in data centers, you probably want to go tens of gigabits, not just gigabits. And then, yeah, wasting all of your CPU cycles with packet processing means you can't use them for anything else.
Well, and that's a good point. I haven't tested the scalability of VNet on my own things because I just haven't run into performance issues on it yet.
So the performance issue isn't VNet on its own, it's the bridge and ePair drivers. And the reconfiguration you have to do to your physical network interfaces so that you can use them in a bridge, which means disabling offloading features.
Okay. Now I get it.
And yeah, you have, instead of basically when you have a big TCP flow, normally you would use LRO and TSO for that. So you build up a 32K or 64K TCP payload and a single header, and then give that to the network stack, and the network card and its driver will turn that into several segments and send it out. And everyone is kind of happy, at least in a data center with a reasonable number of flows per host. And now you have to disable that. And the other problem is all the indirections in the network stack to implement the bridge and e-pair. There's some potential for improvement there. Performance isn't great. E-pair is unreasonably slow for what it really does, just because of all the indirections. Its implementation. Queuing packets again and again. Maybe that can be improved. I don't know how hard that would be, but it's a problem. What you can do is if your network card supports single root I/O virtualization, SRIOV, you can just pre-configure maximum number of non-pass-through devices and give them to your VNET jails. Then you have hardware/firmware bridge in your network card.
And then the jail would just see it as its own personal network card.
Yes, it would then
Okay.
see its own virtual PCI function. That works really well.
Okay, I haven't done that yet because I haven't needed to, but I've just read a little bit about it to
If you have the
know
right,
that's what it looks like.
if you have the right hardware and driver support for it, it's easy to configure, and yeah, shouldn't have any CPU overhead. Basically, it's great if you can use it, but it requires hardware support.
And if I'm going to have a whole bunch of jails running on one physical server, then it would make sense to, plan for that sort of hardware.
Yeah. Oh, and your hardware limited by the PCI spec to, I think, 63 or 64 virtual functions per card. So if you have a high occupancy server with hundreds of jails, that could become a problem. Because you're limited to 64 virtual functions per physical functions.
Okay.
I think some high-end network cards work around that by having multiple physical functions so that they can have up to, I think, 256 virtual functions by splitting it up over multiple virtual functions. Over multiple physical functions. But yeah.
I think that would take a whole lot of additional jails for me to get to the point where that's going to be a limiting factor.
Yeah, but it's something you should know about before you buy a $50,000 server and plan on running hundreds of jails on your 100 gig cord, right? And suddenly after jail 63, everything stops working because you run out of virtual functions. That's not a nice surprise. But being able to run 64 jails without performance overhead is already quite nice, I think. And it is what hardware can offer us. The other thing which is quite surprising, if you've never seen it before, is that oftentimes routing in FreeBSD is faster than bridging. So you may see a performance improvement by just having e-pairs instead of e-pairs on a bridge.
Okay.
It can also
Is that true
reduce.
because it tests?
It's true because the locking is better and the scalability, and you don't re-queue through the bridge driver. You're basically going IP input, IP output, instead of up and down through the network stack.
That's really interesting.
because our routing path is well optimal. And unless you have a really big routing table and you're using the wrong data structures to store it, the routing lookup is not that expensive. On a normal jail host, you probably have a default route and a handful of network routes. So the routing data structure fits in your a few L1 data cache lines. You're not going to have a completely fragmented BGP full feed on your jail host normally. So the same also applies to Beehive. So it can be faster to run the host as a router with one tap interface per jail and full-on microsegmentation where every Beehive guest has its own /31 network and /64 for IPv6 or /127 if you want to, and run it in a routed configuration rather than bridge the tap devices. It also allows you to make use of equal cost multi-path routing compared to having to fight spanning tree when it comes to making use of multiple links. So if your top of rack switches are not multi-chassis link aggregation capable, being able to just use IP routing may give you a way to get the full cross-section bandwidth of your network instead of having to throw half your potential bandwidth away. So I prototyped it and set up an OSPF routing, ping daemon, bird2 on my jail hosts, and then just started, hey, any ePair interface gets redistributed into the IGP. One more controversial use case for VNET Jails I can think of would be if you can't use alias jails cleanly. So sometimes you're forced to run your jails on a network where you have to use DHCP. Let's say you're in some university network and you're told, yeah, just start a DHCP is enabled and there are no static IPs. Or you have to apply for a static lease or whatever, and you have to actually hold the DHCP lease, then it's maybe easier to just run DHCP inside a VNet-enabled jail rather than trying to keep the DHCP lease while also configuring it as an alias.
That would make sense because one of the things that VNet didn't let me do in the jail.conf is, set its IP address in the jail.conf. It had to set it in the rc.conf and or use DHCP.
If you want to, so if you run your VNet jail with just jail.conf, what you can do is in your jail.conf run the sysrc command to write to the jail's rc.conf before you run the netif script. So you would have something like jail.conf with an exec.start where you run sysrc something before you run the rc.d scripts.
Okay, I've just been putting it in the rc.conf script, or the rc.conf file.
Yeah, but you can write to it with sysrc and kind of treat it like a key value store.
Okay.
It's a shell script, it's in base. And you can use that to always set the IP address to something from your jail.conf, so that through the jail.conf on jail start, you inject the if config underscore epair something b, whatever, line into the jail's rc.conf from inside the jail.
Okay, thanks.
Andrenek, are you back? Doesn't appear. Daniel, is your audio working now? Yeah.
It might be. I called IT and they told me to reboot my router.
Nice one.
Oh, I gave it a shot. We'll see.
It's working
But yeah,
for
I think
me at least
I think
right now.
yeah, I think you're coming in now.
So what did you want to talk about with NG Buddy?
That was that was really it. Just those just a couple of dumb bug fixes. I had a really stupid IPv6 bug where you get errors if you it would write the first start the when you enable it, like if you do service ng buddy enable, it guesses what your default route is, and it would write a multi-line network
What?
name if you have IPv4 and IPv6 default routes configured, which is pretty dumb. So I fixed that bug as well. So I've got to get that
it's
in
not just an
ports.
implementation, but it sounds like a pretty strange implementation choice or design choice even to do anything like that in the enable command.
Well, I think that the enable command
Because
I guess that the theory of NGBuddy was to provide a network only feature that sort of worked like the virtual networking for Netgraph. So and then and it's opinionated to have this idea of you have a host network and then you also have a public network. So you have a public, a private network, and maybe a host-only network. So I thought that I would implement a public and private network if you do enable and sort of detect your network by default. So somebody who's relatively new could sit down and say, oh, I want DHCP on my jails. So they do service ng buddy enable, service ng buddy start, and then any jail they create with the service ng buddy jail command, it'll create a EI face device that's then mapped to your LAN. So it was in the service of doing that, making that really easy because I felt like the Netgraph documentation out there is both hard and has steps that are a little cargo cult. Like there's a lot of magical steps and extra steps that people don't need in a lot of the Netgraph documentation out there. So that's what I was shooting for with the enable. And you don't really need enable for it because you want to, you want to, you want to manually configure that. It's really for just editing the RC by default. Of course, I do that on all my servers, but I just wanted to have that. I don't know. Maybe it's a Easter egg, but it's one feature, and it was a buggy feature.
So to me, that is does not sound like something which belongs in the enable rc.d command, but you should have a setup command. And if you want to, you can make it so that if you start without a setup, it will guess. Basically, the setup will then run in batch mode, where it just takes the default answer.
Okay, that's
Similar to
that's
what a
smart.
Postgres with an initdb command does.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. The only
And the
thing that I
nice thing
want to
is you
do.
can make it so that your command could check if your well, I don't know if there's a good way to check for a pipe, but at least you can check if standard in is a TTY and then do something interactive in your
Yeah, I
setup
mean,
command.
anybody who's doing that isn't going to want the default config options, probably.
Oh, they want
But
basically tell them just, here's your setup assistance, I will need you to help me with it. And then basically you give them the default answer and then they can just press enter to confirm or check it. Because especially with IPv6, there's a chance that they have a dynamic prefix, right? Let's say someone runs jails in their home network. And every night
okay,
their prefix changes.
here's my suggestion. You run service buddy enable, as many people have the habit of doing, service whatever enable. And then it'll
That's fine.
say, no interface is configured. Run buddy service buddy config to add an interface. There, that sounds very elegant.
So with regards to DHCP, I have a kind of cursed idea you could try. Have you ever looked at the NGBPF node type?
No, but that sounds exciting.
It allows you to take packets and then you run a BPF script on them, and you have outgoing hooks for match and not match. And you could use this kind of like a stateless firewall to only hijack the DHCP traffic out of a guest. So if there's a DHCP query, it gets redirected into your DHCP service, whereas all normal traffic goes out, so that you kind of wouldn't leak DHCP from the jails onto the network, but could still configure them with DHCP. But it would definitely get into the realm of automagic.
Yeah, I think I'd need to see that happen before I could figure it out. It's pretty cool though.
You could have an EE face interface then, which all the traffic goes to, all the DHCP traffic from the guest, and the output goes back into them as well. And then the DHCP queries and responses go from your NG-body interfaces to your DHCP server instead of the network-facing one. That way you could kind of run a DHCP server without being visible on the physical network. And without having to set up crazy PF or IPFW rules.
Nice.
So yeah, that's it. Normally you use TCP dump as your BPF compiler, have it emit the program bytecode, and then load that into the Netgraph node type. You can basically do anything you can do in a traditional BPF filter. So any kind of thing you can do, for example, in a TCP dump filter expression. Yeah, but Andrenik, the local unbound service you mentioned in the chat is also some of the worst RC.D scripting I know. It kind of just copies the current resource conf into a safekeeping location to always feed into the local unbound. It's a bit messy, to say the least. It solves some real world problems, but I don't think it's a good example of how to use RC.D scripting. Any more topic?
No more topics on my part. Thanks.
Okay. Then let's finish here.
You want me to add it in? Be sure to like and subscribe.
Feel free.
Like and subscribe. There you go.